I'm sure you found that quite a special experience, a very interesting experience, and a profound experience. And it's great that we have the opportunity to talk about how the film was made, how the soundtrack was made in particular. As many of you may know or not, sound is not often regarded as the most important part of films. But in this case, I guess you could say, well, Johnny won the Oscar for film, for the sound on Zone of Interest, Johnny and his team. And we're here to kind of explore how that operates in the film. There was something we were talking about before, and you referred to working on the film. You had film 1 and film 2. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah. We saw the film. We saw the film in 2 parts, and we kind of made it in 2 parts. The film of the people in the house and how they went about their daily lives was something that we obviously went and filmed, and none of the horrors were actually captured visually, obviously. And we went through the whole process of post-production, the process of making the film after the filming in the editing, and we constructed through a rigorous dogma we constructed the film of the people in the house and how you heard the sound of the baby when it left the room and went to other rooms, and the children would run around the side of the house, and we made sure that had an absolute integrity before we went about the process of putting in the soundscape from the camp. And we felt it was necessary to do that because, after all, they were ignoring it. So it was very much, film 1 was everything that you see, and film 2 was the whole idea of what would the camp sound like.
And in going through that whole process of making film 1 of the house, did you ever get the feeling that that was a complete film, that you didn't need the other part of it?
It certainly felt it would have been nice to leave it there. But yeah, it was extraordinary actually, because we learned so much along the way. Film 1, Mika Levy wrote beautiful music that actually underscored a lot of film 1. And it was only when we came to completing film 1 and adding the sounds from the camp that we realized that music in this instance sort of suggested that didn't happen. And there was a lot that we learned along the way in making that, yeah.
But just to go back a little bit, what was the starting point for thinking about how the sound would work in relation to the visuals?
The starting point for me was panic, because Jonathan handed me the script perhaps 3 years before filming, and reading the script, and it didn't specifically say an awful lot about how the sound would be used, but what he told me verbally before reading the script was the only way we ever want to present what happened and what they were ignoring was through sound. And so for me, my beginning of the project was to come to the realization that I would have to become an expert on what Auschwitz sounded like, and how I could faithfully and with great responsibility reproduce those sounds or create those sounds. And that meant an awful lot of research, basically.
Could you give us an idea of what kind of research you did?
Sure.
What you were listening to?
Yeah, I read every book you can imagine and that is available on the subject. I listened to all the recordings of the Nuremberg trials and read witness testimony, and we had access to the Memorial Museum archives, and there's a lot of unpublished testimony in there. And I looked at drawings that prisoners had made, and just did everything I could to understand what happened and what things would have sounded like, and then presented Jonathan with a couple of hundred scenarios, I called them, where events that happened, and these are the kind of little radio plays, as it were, that I would go and attempt to recreate, and that would be the library we would use to place sound against the film once we'd completed the film of the people in the house.
And those little sketches, as they were. Those ended up in the film in the end.
Yeah, very much. I mean, that was the. Yeah, we spent a year putting together the film with the people in the house, and then 6 months at the end of that, going through in a process of. I think we went through the film entirely 16 times, and the first pass we went through adding in what we imagined. We'd get to the scene with the canoe at the beginning, and we'd say, okay, it was morning, it was 9 a.m. I happen to know that these things were happening at those times, and we'd place these specific sounds that we had onto the film with the knowledge that we had, and we went through the film putting sound in, and about halfway through we reversed that and started taking sound out. And the turning point for that was actually when I had a conversation with Chris Oddy, the production designer, and he suggested that we hadn't yet represented the scale of the industry that was happening here. And that was when we came upon the idea of introducing the kind of the constant sound of the camp that is this sort of low-end rumble that does an awful lot of representation of, forcing the juxtaposition and the main idea of the film. And that presented us with the opportunity to remove so much of the incidental is probably the wrong word, but the momentary incidences of specific sound that we had put in, and offered us a great opportunity to desensationalize what we had done. So, yeah, it was 6 months of going through the film and the last month taking it out, basically.
So in a sense, you had created in your own mind a whole world going on behind the wall.
Yeah.
That you could call upon at any given time.
Well, Jonathan Glazer is by far the most rigorous filmmaker that I know, and I knew that once the filming was completed, I would be sitting in a studio with him and making suggestions of what sound we would put on any specific scene. And I had to know that the depth of my knowledge and the rigor with which I recreated those sounds would stand up to his investigation. So, yeah, absolutely, it was all about knowing exactly how the camp worked and what kind of sounds there would be. And to that end, I went about making sure that all the recordings that I made were, for example, recorded at the correct distance so that they had the right acoustic, and yeah, so it was that.
You've worked with him before. Have you ever gone through something this rigorous and detailed?
He is the most rigorous, like I say, but this absolutely topped the lot. I mean, yeah, we worked on Under the Skin, and that was a project in which we understood, we learnt how we like to do sound on film, which is very much to go out and record things ourselves, and the opportunity that presents in the finding fortuitous sounds that you wouldn't normally set about to put in a film, but you discover along the way that these are the things that make things sound authentic. But that was a minnow compared to, the year of research and the year and a half of editorial process. Yeah.
On the visual side, Jonathan had a very specific style. It's no lighting, as I understand.
Yeah.
And the cameras were almost like, not security cameras there, but they're surveillance almost, locked off, long takes. Did the way you thought about the sound reflect in it? Did it match that kind of strategy?
It did. I mean, normally on a film set, as a sound department, you want to capture the words spoken, and everything else you can fabricate later. And Jonathan went to great lengths to do the opposite of that and make it very much about, we just want to observe these people in their environment, like looking at ants. And so it was very important for him that there were no crew visible on the set, so that the actors could, the takes were all about 1 hour long, because that was the length of the memory stick. And it would be unfair to the VFX department to say that the cameras were hidden, but they're mostly hidden in plain sight. But then there were many cameras in every room, and there were 4 microphones in every ceiling, and it wasn't about capturing, nice clean voice. It was about capturing the ambience of the room and the footsteps. And the house itself was a set build that was built like a house you could live in. You know, normally you'd make a stone floor out of actual rubber so that you couldn't hear the footsteps. But here it was about making sure that everything sounded correct and capturing. And because, you know, we came to understand that would provide a much deeper immersion, because the reality of what you're hearing had so much more kind of surveillance to it and credibility, therefore.
And as you were making the soundtrack, working with these kinds of recordings, did it go through a lot of phases of different experiments with the way the house would sound, the way the Beyond the Wall would sound? With
Jonathan, it's very much about exploring every single possible way you could do something and realizing that. And so, you know, 99% of work is discarded and never makes it into the film. And that's why it takes so long, because unfortunately, he's right. You every time you try a new way, you learn something that you wouldn't have discovered unless you actually went about doing it. So, yeah, long process.
Now, we all know you won the Oscar for this. The film won the Oscar. You and your team were awarded the Oscar. And it's, in a way, a very odd film to win an Oscar. And I wondered if, in going into Hollywood and talking to all your peers in the States, what people thought about this. What kind of feedback do you get? What kind of reactions?
I mean, I was very surprised that it even got nominated, because, you know, it's not a typical loud film. But I did meet an awful lot of people who were, you know, Jonathan Glazer is an extraordinary director who completely understands the power of sound in storytelling, and that to have a divergence between what you see and what you hear can you know, even on a not this kind of basis, but on a scene by scene basis in a dialogue drama, could provide so much more of an interesting angle, because it's my understanding that sound you process in about 20 milliseconds and it's in your brainstem and you can't help but react to it. Whereas image you process, it takes about 140 milliseconds for you to see an image and react to it, and you have a thought about it and you analyze it. Whereas sound you don't. So for the most part, sound is the bit you believe before you believe the image. And yeah, so I did, to answer your question, meet an awful lot of people who said, well, yes, this is a clear example of good use of sound, but that's not me. That's in Jonathan's, you know, directorial vision, really.
I'm just thinking of, is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question at this point? Could we have the house lights up a little bit so I can see? Thank you. Yeah, right down there.
Hello. Beautiful movie, by the way. This is the first time that I was watching it, so it's amazing to have this opportunity to actually ask some question to you. So great work. I wanted to know how. What was the thought process with the director? How much was thought before? For example, my actual first question was the low rambling. Was that thought before, or adding the scenes with like these different scenes with people, like this movie 1 and movie 2? Was that thought before? And all this, like this train of creative thoughts came before the movie, after the movie, during the movie, during the shooting of the movie, and so yeah, that's the question.
With Jonathan, it's very much a voyage of discovery, and through that, you some films are made by a picture editor editing the picture and then handing it over to a sound department, and they put together what's to a large part a fait accompli. But here with Jonathan, the sound department are brought on at the same time as the picture editor begins, and you together work out how these things will get put together. You know, like Brunel said, the making of a film is rewritten, you know, the third time in the edit. But for example, the low end rumble was something that came about probably 2 months before we finished, and it was something that we discovered that originally sat on the scene early on in the film with Rudolf Hoss standing in his garden smoking a cigar, and it was the sound of the crematoria. And we elected to mix that with some sounds of the other armament manufacturing and clothes manufacturing and industry from the camp, and decided to see what it would sound like to put that across the whole film. And that was a real game changer in how the film worked, basically. And that was certainly not scripted. And when I first read the script, like I said a minute ago, Jonathan was saying, I don't know how we're going to do this, but the starting point, it would be really great if you could understand what 24 hours in Auschwitz might have sounded like and present me with some ideas on that. And I set about doing that whilst he went and filmed in Poland. And when he came back, we together worked out how all these things would work. And I think the reason the film is so comprehensively knitted together is because it's a series of logistical problems that are solved with creative solutions. And that's how Jonathan works. The editor, the musician, and the sound department and the visual effects people all work together, trying to tell a story that ends up being reasonably different from the beginning script. So it's a complex puzzle.
Question about something you just said. How close is it to the script?
Probably not very. Certainly the scenes that, the lying in bed, Hedwig and Rudolf talking about chocolate, if you find it, all of those were very much scripted. But the arc of the film and the flow of how information is delivered and the nuance that you react to is something that's enormously rigorously calibrated over many months to discover quite, the subtleties of how the film work. Many scenes were removed that were scripted, and some scenes were created that didn't exist in the script, basically. Yeah.
Right. Anybody else? The man in the middle there.
Yeah, hi. This is, I think, the fourth time I watched the film. I really loved it. And I have two questions. And one is, as a sound designer, how do you approach the script before, the shooting, also to give some ideas, or I don't know. And the second question is, the scene when there is a dinner party and everyone is there around, how did you design the scene? Because sometimes I do sound design as well. So there is a similar scene that I worked like this, where it's all, like sounds from everywhere, and sometimes it sounds like it's just a block of sounds, even like you just copy and paste some to create atmospheres or something. And so how did you build this scene to create, like a purpose or something?
It needs to have a flow to it. And for that scene, it was very much, the narrative that guides you through that scene is very much in the reactions of the audience and the laughter and the way that the music works and all of that. I can only say, just took many weeks of carefully placing, going out and recording people at parties in Germany and finding peals of laughter or shouts of voice and just putting every tile in. And everything is there for a reason. And just sort of painstakingly finding pieces. The actual recordings from the shoot, for the most part, in that whole of that party, there were, I think, maybe a dozen or so extras who were actually German, but most of them were Polish. So the language wasn't correct. So it was a lot of additional recordings that were made, which brings me to your first question, which was how you said about sound designing. I mean, for me, it's very important to read the script before it's filmed and to discuss with the director how many different opportunities there may be for telling the story, either advancing what they're attempting to achieve or completely circumventing the need to have a steam engine because you might just need to hear it instead of see it. And so it's reading the script and understanding the possibility of sound and then going and capturing your own sound and the opportunities that you get from that and presenting that to the film editor and the director as they're putting the film together in the editorial process. And that's how good sound definitely happens in the script, not kind of anywhere else, really.
Could you elaborate on that? Could you elaborate on that? It's a really good line, that good sound happens in the script.
Well, it does. I mean, there's sound doesn't perform a task other than creating the semblance of reality, which is, for the most part, in many films, sound, like my mother would have said, "What do you mean you do the sound on films? They sound all right to me," because that's the sound went in the camera at the time. And so for most films, you're just trying to make the things seem real and put the glass down sound effects in and the footsteps and everything. But if sound is to perform a task that is anyway part of the narrative or the emotional steer of a scene, then there's no way that's going to really be stuck on afterwards. It definitely has to be written in. And my guilty secret is that when I read a script from a director or whatever, I'll usually search for the word sound, and I'm not interested in so many to how often it appears, but whether or not there's an adjective before it, because if there's a descriptor, then I know ask in the film, basically. Yeah.
There is that
Time.
we didn't put the money in. There is that phrase that the Hollywood sound designer, California sound designer Randy Tom says, "You don't design sound for a film, you design a film for sound." Yeah. And that seems to be what you're getting at, that the script did for you.
The smartest thing I was ever told was, don't be a sound designer, be a filmmaker, be the filmmaker who happens to be doing sound. And so it's not about trying to say, I've got all these wonderful sounds that I've made. It's about saying, what's the story and how can we use sound to tell that, or how can we use sound to serve that story? And the earlier that you can get into the process of the filmmaking, and that's the script stage, is to the better effect of use of sound. And I think it is immensely rewarding for an audience to watch a film that has a divergence between what you see and what you hear, because it keeps your brain moving a lot better than so often a film will just be using the soundscape to reinforce what you already know, which works.
From what you say, I would assume you'd think that most films don't work like that.
Many, yeah, certainly the majority, yeah. Yeah.
You see what you hear.
Exactly, yeah, and the music will often be supporting the emotion that you already feel. And for me, it's way more interesting to have a confluence of ideas that provide a different sum of the parts, basically. Yeah.
Back to the audience. Woman right down here in the 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello.
5.
I've got the mic. Sorry.
There. Okay. You're ahead of us.
My question is about the sound that isn't about the camp and some of the more sort of obvious. Not saying that. The placed sound, like the clacks and the kind of alarms. Can you speak about the sound that wasn't that background sound, the sort of more, what was the thought process between that and the
sounds from the camp that were not the rumble?
Well, I don't know if they were from the camp, because that's what I'm saying, the sort of, the obvious kind of alarm sounds. Obviously, I may have got the wrong end of the stick. There seemed to me some more conventional placement of sound that wasn't backgrounded, that was more as you'd expect.
Yeah, very much.
So that's one, sorry. And the
Got
other
it.
was how faithful, how concerned were you you were clearly doing a lot of research to be faithful. Was there any way you tested that with anyone who would have been in the surrounding area of the camp itself to understand the accuracy of what you'd created? Those are the two
Certainly
questions.
the responsibility to faithfully reproduce sound to the best of my team and my ability, and to know that it would have to stand up to, you know, the scrutiny of a large cohort of people who, you know, for whom it needs to be faithfully represented. And absolutely, you know, the director of the Memorial Museum himself, you know, watched the film and gave notes and feedback on work in progress. And yeah, very much it was, for me, it was to understand, for example, what klaxons there would be, what they sounded like, and at what time of day they would sound. And you know, there are certain scenes where you can hear faintly playing the camp orchestra, and that, you know, we understood exactly what pieces of music they were playing and what time of day they would do that. We knew what time of day certain deliveries would happen and when those trucks would arrive and when you'd hear metal barrels being rolled and banged. And so, yeah, you know, we knew that Block 11, which was about 150 meters down away from the garden, was the site of, on average, about 90 executions a day by gunshot. And so we could extrapolate from that how often it would be honest to have the sound of gunshots. And on the one hand, we didn't want to make it salacious or sensationalized, but on the other hand, to not have any gunshots would be misrepresenting what happened. So, I read obviously much testimony and about incidences of torture and beating and brutality, and that's why we went about finding in the real world where these sounds exist and reappropriating them to put them in the film to represent what happened there. But yeah, trying to get it right and with the responsibility of the subject matter was paramount for all of us, absolutely. Yeah. What was the first question? Sorry?
It was about the sound that didn't sound like background sound, but you've answered it, because what you're saying is those alarms would have existed. So to me, some of it felt more Hollywood, if you will.
Yeah.
Some of the more dramatic sound, and I thought that was really interestingly contrasted with the sort of more incidental sound. But actually, what you said has answered my question.
But we went to great lengths to desensationalize things. I mean, there was a period where the film existed as a very surround immersion, where you would hear things from their spatial position relative to the garden, and we elected to have it as a very mono soundscape on the front wall of the cinema because it made it sound more documentary. But in terms of the actual sounds that we used, there's much is written about the sound of the fence, that the electric fence that runs along the garden wall. And, you know, I probably read 4 or 5 descriptions of it, and what I did was create sounds that approximated what I understood to be there, and at the kind of volume that seemed to be representative. So, and it passed the test of playing to people, as I understand it, who are, you know, who have, you know, knowledge on this matter. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was a year of deep research into the material and understanding how the camp worked and where sounds would have come from, the distances where they were, the nationality of the different cell blocks, and so the orientation of and the proximity of the different nationality voices, for example. And yeah, I had a big map and where different kinds of sounds came from, and worked out the science of the volume they would have and the amounts of reflective echoes from the buildings around them. But And I'm sorry you found it since Hollywood, but the aim was to not go anywhere near there.
Hello. I thought it was an amazing film and really immersive. I had a couple of questions. One was just a very kind of quite practical question, which is how you made those sounds. So it's sounding as if you were going out and collecting wild sounds in a way with the German parties and things. But did you actually almost have a cast that you could record to, you know, the horrific sounds of screams, or, you know, the character shouting, and, you know, someone shooting bullets and things? Presumably, did you have people that you could kind of almost direct and record the sound of? And the other question I had was just, do you have, aside from all of your research, which sounds really meticulous, did you have any kind of filmic influences in terms of the sound design, or, you know, any other kind of, you know, radio plays or anything? Because I kind of thought that it reminded me of another director's film design at one or two points, but maybe it all organically came out of your research. So I'm just interested to know if there's any other kind of artistic influences as well as the historical.
Right. Yeah, so the sounds was, I mean, Jonathan said to me right at the beginning, in no circumstance do I want you to get a room full of actors in Soho and ask them to pretend this is happening. There's enough pain and suffering in the world. Go out and try and find that and record it. And you know, my team and I thought, okay, how can we approach this? And we had many months, and a lot of it was traveling around Europe and finding things. A lot of the shouts of the guards are young men at 4th Division football matches in rural Germany who shout aggressively in a. You're not hearing the actual word spoken, but you're hearing the kind of the body language of the sound, and put it in the context of the film delivers its meaning. There was the work and pension riots in Paris. We travelled there and recorded the sound of aggressive and pain shouting, and part of the scene by the flowers is a recording of someone suffering in a riot in Paris. So yeah, it was about going out and discovering where these things exist in real life, and using that. And that felt like it had a purpose within the film, and far more respectful than trying to pretend. And as for influence, I can't say that Jonathan has ever said to me, we want to do something like this. It's absolutely a voyage of discovery to see what fits the film. I think the only film I think that influenced this for me was the last one we did, Under the Skin, which was where we understood so much about how we wanted to make sound, you know, how to use sound. But what was the influence that you...
I was thinking towards the end with the kind of that music. It's more the music, I suppose, but it's also that aspect of the kind of far off sound that's indistinct of voices. Made me think of the kind of last scene, so to speak, of 2001.
yeah.
With those kind of weird noises where the astronauts in the room and you can hear these disembodied voices.
Yeah, no, I'll take that. That's
So yeah, that kind of made me, yeah.
No, I mean, I'm obviously a huge Kubrick fan, so but that's about rigor in the sound that you use, and not having anything spare. I remember Jonathan's wife saying to me something that Jonathan attempts to build a scaffold of filmmaking with all the different departments, and in that present a feeling to the viewer. And then the last part of the process is to see how many of the poles of scaffolding that you can remove and still keep the feeling there. So that's about keeping things as lean as possible and not having anything that is any way verbose, sort of in sound or image or anything. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. It was a great film, and congrats with the awards and everything. So I don't really know anything about sound design, but I guess usually you edit sound from the image and you just like put the sound of what you see. But with the two black screens at the beginning and the end, you kind of make sound independent in the film. And so I kind of have an abstract question, but I was wondering, what's the relationship in this film with the image and the sound?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's interesting. Jonathan came up with the idea of having a musical prologue to the film in order to. Initially, it was to allow people to settle down and prepare themselves for what they're about to watch. You know, put your phone away and forget about your thoughts of the day. But the unintended consequence was it was saying, use your ears, and here's a film that will be enormously about what you see, but more importantly, what you hear. And I know I've heard John say that arguably the sound of the film is the film. What is the relationship of the sound and the film? It's a film that uses sound to tell a story that if you had the sound off, you simply wouldn't understand at all.
Hi, congratulations again.
Hello.
So I know that in sound design, one of the greatest weapons in sound, as ironic as it sounds, it's actually silence. And silence in between those sounds. You've talked about how important those sounds have to be and how timed the gunshots were. But how did you decide on where the silent moments should be? What were your discussions with the director about it? I think it adds a lot of drama, and I think that silence itself gives a lot of context to the sound that you're adding up. How did you balance it? What did you consider was going to be good, like a good moment for just silent moment?
Yeah. Like this silence. Yeah, I mean, silence is probably crass to say it, but my favorite sound, and it's so powerful, and the decision to stop playing any sound is something that obviously creates an enormous beat in the movie and causes reflection because the information has stopped. As for discussions with the director, I think with Jonathan, we rarely theoreticize about anything. We just go and do. And so it's about working on a scene and trying all the different ways you can do it and feeling, following your heart and seeing how it works. Silence is absolutely powerful, and in this film, extraordinarily so. Yeah. Does that answer it? Thereabouts.
Hi, congratulations on the film. This is my first time seeing it, and it was amazing. My question is, was there any discussion around the use of animal sounds to mirror the different sides of the fence, so the home versus the camp? Because I know that one instance that quite a few survivors in their memoirs had mentioned was that the sound of the dogs barking was something that really stood out to them. And so was that something that you had found in your research that you said, okay, we needed to include this to be authentic, but also because it did mirror the family dog that they had, and you know, the whining, the vulnerability that dog portrayed versus the aggression of the German shepherds to the prisoners.
Yeah, I mean, well spotted. The actual dog in the film is Sandra Hüller's actual dog, and that's why I'm very good at following Sandra around. But it's true that the family had a dog, and it's true that it was a very different animal to the ones that lived on the other side of the wall. And yes, you know, big Alsatians barking are a scary and horrible sound, and much different to the family pet. And absolutely, that was something that I found in my research, was something that was given in testimony. You know, that the dogs were used not just to scare people, but to cause harm as well. So it felt representative to absolutely have that sound coming from the other side of the wall, and the power of the juxtaposition of hearing the sound of a horrible dog and seeing a picture of a nice one does force home the message of the film.
I have one last question for you. You worked on this film for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And you would have gotten very close to all the characters, the situations. What effect did it have on you? How do you feel about the family?
I'm glad it's over. I remember 4 weeks into the beginning of the research thinking, goodness, I can't believe I'm going to have to keep doing this for a very long time. And then going on a press tour was like, oh, we're doing that, we're talking about it now for ages, are we? So yeah, I mean, really difficult. I know that everyone who worked on the film, all the other heads of department I've spoken to, have said, like me, you know, that they're very glad and honoured to have worked on it, but very happy that the project is complete, because it's difficult. My relationship with the family, I don't know. Yeah. Glad it's finished, but yeah. Does that answer it? Yeah. But yeah. But thank you all for sticking around.
Thank you, Johnny.